Hello, this is Niswander, and you're watching the Nowman Show, and I'm here in Pasadena, California with Caleb Maupin. The data released in 2022 from the U.S. Congressional Budget Office, the bottom 50% between 1989 and 2019 shared 2% of the wealth. It pretty much has not changed. And that's up to the pandemic, so we don't know what happened after with the pandemic. And perhaps the most shocking one of all is that the top 10% as of 2019 shares about 72% of the wealth in this country. So why is this inequality just out of control? This is not a system that is sustainable. So now more and more people are at least open to listening about socialism. And I believe it was Richard Wolff that said socialism is a system of transition to something better than where you are. So that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the ultimate system where you end up. But, when people talk, well, socialism doesn't work, and I tell them, and you can add to this, I tell them, well, what do you call Social Security? It's pretty popular from what I can tell. And even unemployment insurance has been pretty popular from the New Deal in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. So those are just two examples. The post office, it's pretty popular. What are your thoughts now going forward as far as some solutions for the economy? Besides the obvious, we shouldn't be sending billions of dollars thousands of miles away for war. What are your thoughts on that subject? What are, as far as solution economically for this country, as an example?
I think the biggest factor in this concentration of wealth that you described and in the economic suffering, that the incomes are going down, the next generation is stuck in a cycle of short-term, low-wage service sector jobs. The biggest factor in that is technology, and technology should be a good thing. I believe in technology, but under our system, technology is set up to make a profit for the owners of private companies. And a great example of that is self-driving cars, right? We're a couple of years away from self-driving cars, where, with between artificial intelligence and sensors and we could have cars that drive themselves. In a rational society, that would be a great thing, because this job called driving would no longer be necessary. The cars would drive themselves. But in our society, that would lead to millions of Uber drivers out of work, millions of truck drivers out of work. All the kind of people that work in traffic courts would be out of work. I mean, it would be a disaster. Andrew Yang, who was running for president, said that there would be riots.
I interviewed him.
Yeah, he said there would be riots in the streets if we had self-driving cars. Well, why do we have a society where technological advancement, making human labor more productive, and making it so the work that we actually do accomplishes way more because we have all this technology, why does that lead to greater poverty, right? And this is something that is really the underlying fact that Marx was talking about, and that never before in history, before capitalism, did you ever have a system where people were homeless because there were too many houses, where people were hungry because there was too much food, right? And we have a system where abundance creates poverty. And that is a big problem. And that in our system in the past, we've noticed that when there is a big leap in technology, it's followed by a long-term economic crisis. World War I came after many great advances in the Industrial Revolution and industrialization, and that led to all kinds of crises and panics. And ultimately, the big imperial powers, Britain and France and Germany, went to war with each other to carve up the world as their profits were going down. World War II came after the Great Depression. And the Great Depression was brought on by the fact that in the 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, Henry Ford and Taylor and others really advanced the ability of industry to produce. And at first, it created a boom. And then there was a big depression that just wouldn't get better. And that led to, people around the world rising up and protesting and communism. It also led to the rise of fascism in various places. And we had a huge, devastating war. And that kind of reset the economy for a few decades. And right now, we're living in the aftermath of the computer revolution. And the computer revolution has advanced human productivity amazingly. Computers can play chess better than humans can. They can trade stocks better than human beings can. Computers can do amazing things. And if we had a rational society, that would be great. But as a result, we have a situation where, the old song Solidarity Forever, one of the verses, it says, we stand outcast and starving mid the wonders we have made, right? We built so much, the world has become so abundant that now people are homeless, that now, here in Los Angeles, you have Skid Row with all these homeless people. You have all these neighborhoods throughout America that are dotted with empty foreclosed homes. You have states in 27 different states. You have municipalities that are unpaving the roads. They can't afford to maintain a paved road, so they have this device called a reclaimer that pulls up the asphalt, pulverizes it, and replaces a paved road with a gravel dirt road. I mean, this is not rational, right? And that socialism is when you have the economy, the banks and the factories and the industries and the centers of economic power organized in the interests of society overall, not simply the profits of a wealthy few. It is an attempt to organize the economy rationally so that growth can continue without this problem of poverty created by abundance, of the boom-bust cycle, of all of this. Now, China, they are a great example of socialism taking a country that was once the sick man of Asia and making it an industrial superpower. There's many examples of socialism being successful. The Soviet Union had the first spacecraft. They defeated the Nazis. They electrified that whole area. They had many, many great achievements in terms of raising people up. And I think socialism has changed. The Soviet style of doing things is never going to come back. And you do need a market sector for the things that make life fun. I don't think the government should run hotels and restaurants. Let people have their own idea and do that.
Government shouldn't run the entertainment industry either.
Yeah, children's toys or things like that. But the basics of the economy, the healthcare, the power plants, the steel mills, the purse strings of the credit of the country, right? These things should be run in the interest of society overall and guided by a government that is loyal to the population and not to a small group of billionaires who might own it. The slogan in CPI that we've used, we say that we need a government of action that will fight for working families, right? Because we've been told, well, the government is best, the governs least. The government should just sit back. And I tell people, if you're a parent and you're just sitting back and your child isn't being fed properly, or your child's not getting, proper clothing to keep warm in the winter or whatnot, that's called neglect. And I would say that our government is guilty of criminal neglect. Too much of this country has been forgotten about, has been left behind. And so what we need is a government of action. That'll pave the roads, that'll hire the unemployed, that'll start rebuilding the country. We have a 4-point economic plan to improve the United States. Step 1 is a mass program of construction. Hire the unemployed, put them to work doing useful work, building, constructing, etc. Step 2 is public control of our natural resources. America's oil, America's coal, America's timber, America's natural gas. The wealth from that should go into the public budget.
What about electricity?
The electricity that comes from our rivers or from put energy and put natural resources into public ownership. And then the third stage would be public control of our banking system, so that, and I tell people, maybe Marx is a little too radical for you, read the Bible, read the Quran, read the Torah, right? They all forbid the lending of money at interest, because everybody knows that if you have a group of people who make money by having money, they just lend money and get money back, pretty soon they're going to be way richer than everybody else, and pretty soon the government's going to be indebted to them, and pretty soon they're going to have all the power. And the Federal Reserve System is just a ripoff. I mean, we get poorer. Every time we print $1, we get like $2 in debt. This doesn't make any sense. So get rid of the Federal Reserve, create a national bank, create a state bank, create some local banks that lend credit strategically for how we can make our country more prosperous, right? If we think we need more businesses in a certain area, lend money to make it happen. We need more people owning homes, we lend money to make it happen. But lending credit strategically, putting control of the purse strings of credit into the hands of the country overall, right? That'll enable us to control our economy. And then our fourth step would be the enactment of an economic Bill of Rights, which is what our President Roosevelt called for in his final State of the Union address: the right to a job, the right to housing, the right to education. And I tell people we shouldn't view these things as a handout, right? We've been told that if, giving people health care, giving people a job, that's just like giving them a handout. No. We should view it as an investment in the nation, right? Because if we're going to have a strong economy, we need everyone to be contributing to it. We need everyone to be employed and working and contributing. If we're going to have a strong country, we're going to need a healthy country where the people are at their best health so they can be as productive as possible. If we're going to have a strong country, we need an educated country. We don't want our people to be stupid. We need engineers. We need scientists. We need smart people who can make an informed decision when they go to vote. So an economic Bill of Rights is really an investment in our country, because if we're going to have a strong country, we need to have a strong population, because it's the people that make a country. right? And so an economic bill of rights, that's our 4-point plan. National program to rebuild, public control of natural resources, public control of banking, economic bill of rights. And we think those 4 steps, the USA might not, fully be socialist if those things were implemented. One could imagine some kind of welfare state or some kind of populistic government that wasn't fully socialist that did those 4 things. But in order to enact those 4 things, you'd have to defeat the power of all the big banks. You'd have to defeat the power of all the big oil companies and energy monopolies. You have to mobilize the population. Socialism wouldn't be too far off. And we call those 4 things that we would like to enact, we call that a government of action. And it would be a state or a government that would operate in a different way. And it kind of reminds me what I saw in Venezuela. The reason that Hugo Chavez was so popular was because right after he got elected, there was a mudslide. There was mudslides in the country. And he sent the military to go help the people that were affected by these mudslides. And that had never been done before in Venezuela's history. The military had generally only been sent in to put down uprisings, etc. And so when these mudslides happened and all these people were displaced, he sent the military in, and there was a wave of patriotism. People said, wow, we've never seen the military and the government move this way. And he created citizens' power councils, Bolivarian circles, and that's how Venezuela got on the road to socialism, was through, this kind of showing people what a popular government could do. And, I think about what Roosevelt did when he was president, right, with the Works Progress Administration, building the the Civilian Conservation Corps, building post offices, building highways, building airports. If you had a government that was mobilizing people and calling them to get involved in the political process, you could actually do a lot of things. But right now, we don't have leaders that view things that way. I think, however, we're entering a long-term crisis, and our elite are fighting among each other right now. And historically, that is what opens the door to popular movements, because as the elite fight among each other, they need mass movements of people to have their back, and that creates the opening, right? And the reason Roosevelt was able to do all that he did was because he aligned himself with the labor movement. He said workers had the right to occupy their factory and demand union recognition, and he aligned himself with the mass popular movements because he was at odds with the rest of his class. The business plot and various fascist elements wanted to remove Roosevelt, and he saw himself under attack, so he fomented a mass movement to protect himself. And I don't suspect that Donald Trump would do such a thing, but if he was smart, he would. Right? If Donald Trump, he sees that the majority of the government and the capitalist class is against him, they're trying to imprison him for running for office, trying to keep him out of office. If Donald Trump was popular, he would align himself with a mass movement of people, fighting for economic justice. I thought it was great when Jimmy Dore said that on the Tucker Carlson show. He said, and that really in order to change society, you need a mass movement. And often mass movements begin because of divisions within the ruling class. And we're entering a period where there are big divisions in our ruling class, and so that creates openings for the people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, but didn't also Roosevelt say that the New Deal actually saved capitalism? Didn't he say something like that?
Yeah, and that was his intent. He was not a communist, right? But, he also wanted to maintain friendship with the Soviet Union. And who knows what could have happened. I mean, he died just as World War II was ending, and he was replaced with Truman, and then the Cold War began. Truman dropped those atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the world changed. And Henry Wallace, who had been the vice president under Roosevelt, he ran for president in 1948, and he was very much a socialist in a lot of ways. So it's complicated. But ultimately, Roosevelt was from the wealthy capitalist class, but he was at odds with the rest of his class, and he fomented a mass movement for his own reasons, but that opened the door to all kinds of different things happening. So I think we need to study these things and look at how can we change society, because I meet a lot of younger people that are interested in socialism and communism, but a lot of them have lost the understanding that we can change the world. A lot of them think that it's kind of a way to express their alienation, but we need to look at the history of mass movements. The labor movement, the peace movement of the 1960s. There have been the civil rights movement, the Black liberation movement. There have been movements that have changed the course of American history, and we should study those movements and learn from them.
Yeah, like for instance, Eugene Victor Debs and what was going on over 100 years ago. When there were actual socialist parties that actually had some influence, and that's and a communist party working with the CIO. That's how the New Deal really happened. It wasn't Democrats and Republicans. I tell that to a lot of my friends. It wasn't Democrats and Republicans that that technically initiated that idea at all. It was the movements of what was going on, and I tell people about Henry Wallace, how he was a socialist and he was a pacifist. So that's why the powers that be didn't want him to be the president, because they had plans for those bombs. You know what I mean? And so people need to understand. This is why it's important to understand the history. You know what I mean? So that you can at least have a different perspective than what you were taught or weren't taught in school. Which is, again, getting back to CPI, that's a vital role to provide materials for people to be able to read on their own, and also to do podcasts and interviews and talk about, like what we're doing now, talk about actual things from history, so that those that are interested at some point, I think we'll see more and more people who are interested because they're not satisfied with their life. And, in order to understand how we got to where we are now, you do have to understand some history. Yes. Right? So I think providing that information, so here's some tools. Here's some information for you. If you on your own time, if you want to read this, if you have questions, if you're frustrated and you want to know more, you can read this and you can learn something. And at the very least, you can decide whether you want to accept it or not, but at least you have access to the information. Yeah. And CPI is doing a great job. Well, what are some examples of some of the books that you've published or had republished?
Well, the first book we ever published was The Green Book by Muammar Gaddafi, because, Libya, under the leadership of Gaddafi, had the highest life expectancy in Africa. They had built the world's largest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River. And so we wanted to show people what it was that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama destroyed with their bombing campaign in 2011, and how it was that the most prosperous country in Africa was reduced to rubble, and what NATO, this criminal organization, what it had done in Libya. So we published the Green Book, which is the manifesto of the Libyan government. We have also published a number of books, about socialism in the United States, socialist history, about economics, trying to give a new perspective, because we do feel like, a lot of the left are very, very loyal to the Democratic Party, and they view the masses of the American people as their enemy, and that's a huge mistake. And so we have to rethink left and right in our time. I'm a religious person. I believe in God. I'm a Christian, and I think that Christian faith and socialism walk hand in hand. Obviously there was horrendous persecution of Christians during the Cold War time, but the communist world has largely changed its perspective. The head of the Russian Communist Party, who I've met, Gennady Zyuganov, he's a Christian. He's a Russian Orthodox Christian. Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela, is a Roman Catholic. Daniel Ortega of Nicaragua, not only is he a Roman Catholic, but the slogan of the government is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. And that we need to rethink left and right and how we orient ourselves, because unfortunately, I think a lot of the most ugly capitalist politics, this degrowth notion that human beings are a cancer, the radical individualism where everyone feels a need to yell at everybody else and tear them down the way people do on social media. Unfortunately, a lot of the left has embraced that. And a lot of Americans are rightly threatened by that. They don't appreciate that. And I think that, is those sentiments of resisting the low-wage police state and the degrowth and the march toward World War III and the kind of elements of control that are being imposed on our population right now. That is where the socialists and the anti-imperialists need to be. And we don't need to be with the left. It's almost kind of trying to enforce it and sees the enemy as the population. And that's, CPI is kind of new in our orientation. We tell people we're not left, we're not right, we're anti-war, we're socialists, and we're
patriots.
And we're patriots too. We love our country, right? And if you don't love your country, why should the country listen to you? If you're not motivated by trying to make things better in your country, what do you have to say? It's just kind of common sense. If you're in Brazil, you're a political leader in Brazil, you should be trying to make Brazil better. If you're in Greece and you're trying to make Greece, you're a political leader, you should be trying to make Greece better. It's just common sense. But unfortunately, a lot of the left has gotten into this kind of weird identity politics place where it's not about actually trying to make things better. It's about demonstrating how good you are. It's a virtue signaling. And I think that's a problem. And so in order to do the work that needs to be done, we've had to, separate ourselves from the mainstream of the left. And I think, but, we'll talk to anybody. I mean, the fact that I'm here in LA for this event, right? The idea of me doing something with this particular church, 5-10 years ago, I would have thought was outrageous.
Right.
And they probably would have thought the same thing.
Exactly.
But the world is changing, and we should embrace that change, because the world is constantly changing and evolving, and I'm constantly learning. I don't think exactly what I thought 10 years ago. I don't think you do either, right? And it's important to be able to learn and reconsider, and that's really a big part of what it means to be an American. The most popular American hymn is Amazing Grace. Yeah. And that's the story of a man who owned a slave ship, right? And he was on that ship, and he'd gotten a bunch of people from Africa, and he was going to take them to the United States to be sold as slaves. And then he was caught in a storm, and he had a religious awakening, and he turned that ship around, right? And that song became popular because many Americans thought that our country needed to turn around from slavery, and that was the basis of the Second Great Awakening, a spiritual revival movement that laid the basis for the coming Civil War and the struggle to abolish slavery.
The Second Reformation movement.
Yeah, the Second American Revolution, really, and the idea that we should be constantly learning, and that we can change our ways, and we can adopt new ideas. That's very much part of the American spirit, I think. So I don't think what we're doing as CPI is a problem. I think it's actually very helpful, and I think a lot of people see that. I tell people we are the political version of the Velvet Underground. You know the Velvet Underground?
I'm a musician,
Oh, okay. All right. Well, you know very well, right? That they didn't ever sell as many records as the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, but everyone who bought their albums started a band, right? And that they did things that the Rolling Stones and the Beatles did later because they did it first. They were pioneers. They were the cutting edge. Well, CPI, we are the political Velvet Underground, right? We talked about patriotic socialism and all of that before anybody did. And now there's all kinds of people on the internet that are calling themselves patriotic socialists, MAGA communists, and all of that. Well, you can thank us for that. We paved the way. We talked about the Uhuru case. The right after they got raided. A week after they were raided, they were at our conference in Chicago, and we gave them a standing ovation. We supported them. Now Tucker Carlson is having them on. Now their case is getting international attention. We were there from the beginning, and we don't see this. I tell people in politics, what you might call plagiarism is actually the highest form of flattery. It means that you're right, And so I don't see this as people stole our idea. I see that, no, we accomplished something, right? I've heard people use the expression throwing the newspaper over the fence. Because when you do the kind of work that we do, you come up with ideas and you throw them out there, and you never know, And one idea that we came out with 4 or 5 years ago, we had the idea that because the rent is going up in major cities all across the country, the reason it's going up is because of real estate speculation, right? These landlords, they buy a property, and then they wait for the market to go up, and then they sell it. And they don't actually have to have anyone move in order to make any money.
I've seen a lot of that.
Yeah, and in fact, if people move in and they don't pay it high enough, it makes the property value go down. So they actually try to make the rent as high as they can so they can flip the property. And so the rent keeps going up, and Americans can't afford to live. So we came up with the idea in CPI, and I talked about it on my live streams. We wrote some articles about it. Why not tax landlords for empty housing units, right? And give them an economic incentive to fill every housing unit. Well, Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, has included that in her official platform. That's great. I don't know if she heard it from us, or maybe somebody heard it from us who then passed it on to somebody, who passed it on to somebody. But now that's part of the Green Party platform. Well, Jill Stein, we've interviewed her before. CPI members have interviewed her.
I have too. Yeah.
So maybe she got it from us, maybe not. We threw the newspaper over the wall, and it's caught on. And now a candidate who's going to be on the ballot in, I think, enough states that she could actually win. She's probably not going to win as a third-party candidate, but a candidate that's going to get national recognition has taken a policy solution, not a complaint, not an anger, but a solution that we developed and is including it. I think that's a great sign, and that's the role that we seek to play. We seek to be a factory of ideas in a lot of ways, and we want to get people thinking, and we want to get people to come together. We want to build a community of people who can work together and rely on each other, and we want to make connections in places that you wouldn't normally find connections.
Community is on every possible level you can imagine, including what could be what we call intentional communities, where you have a certain number of people living on properties, right? And there's people starting to do that and thinking in terms of, okay, then maybe another intentional community will be down the road. Sure. And that would change society dramatically Just like, I know you talk about, you don't really focus a lot on worker-owned cooperatives, but I think there is that component too that can be part of that process where people realize that they can make all the most important decisions. Why leave it to a handful of people when you're running a business? The possibilities, like with Mondragon in the Basque region of Spain, where they've shown how it can be done and how it can grow.
Well, I think the most successful examples of cooperatives have been in the socialist countries. I mean, Huawei Technologies is a profit-sharing cooperative under Chinese law. It's the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. Harvard Business Review said it's one of the greatest examples of profit sharing as a model for a company working, and it's in the communist government of China. They set up Huawei Technologies as a private company where profits are shared among the employees. Now, that doesn't mean that everything's perfect there, but that's an example, right? I think, and there's many examples. In Nicaragua, where I've been to Nicaragua, I was there as an elections monitor a couple of years ago. They have thousands of worker cooperatives that are part of their micro entrepreneurship program that they've started. So, I think worker cooperatives can be part of the process of changing society. However, I do emphasize a government, right? We do need a government of action. So that's where I would differ on that, and that worker cooperatives just in and of by themselves would be competing with other worker cooperatives.
Let's grow this conversation. Let's talk some more. It's also setting the example of showing others really what ought to be done right now, of reaching out to other groups that want to talk to you that you might disagree with. I mean, I don't agree with myself 100% of the time.
Well, there you go.
Do you know what I mean? Because I am, like you said, I am like a sponge. I want to learn. One of the things that I want to talk about more and more, I've started in my series, I've been on the air now for 10 years, it's my 10th season, is a new renaissance. I think we need a new renaissance. And of course, I'm using that as a marketing term. I'm really talking about enlightenment. And that can literally be everyone. Everyone can play a role in that. Because most people, when they think of Renaissance, they think of music and literature and theater. There's so much more to what can be done with the concept of Renaissance, right? And some people have a negative view of it too. And again, they base everything on the past and not a progressive view, a new, broader view. But it really, as I see it, is about enlightenment. And there's something every one of us can do in the process of growing that kind of movement or that way of thinking about everything in life. So I want to just put that thought out there to you and to CPI and everybody. What do you think about a new renaissance where everybody plays a role, plays an important part, no matter what kind of skills or talents that you have or knowledge, and everybody brings something to the table and we all learn from each other and help each other. That's really what we're here to do, in this so-called life. Now the spiritual part of it, consciousness, well, that's a whole nother, we don't know where that's going to lead us, but in this world where we are now, let's make the most of it, right?
Yep. Sounds good to me. I hope to make my audience smarter. I hope to encourage and empower other people to come up with their own ideas and do their own thing. That's what I view the responsibility of the writer, the thinker, the artist to do, right? The musician should be making you better with their music. The filmmaker should be making you better with their film. And I think that the artist has a responsibility, and that art is not simply about making money. It's about making the society better with the art.
Let's help each other. No one can tell me that a billionaire worked to the degree that he earns all that money. Some of these people are on track to be trillionaires from what I understand. So at some point, this is not sustainable. We have to go through a transition phase. It's an ongoing process. So let's work together on this and continue the conversation. Caleb, thank you so much for being on the Nowman Show.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And always remember, stay present in the moment now.